Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Don Marsh. There are many variables when it comes to the issue of adoption. It's an emotional roller coaster on so many levels, affecting the adoptees, the birth parents, the adoptive families. Joining me in studio are two people who have lived in these worlds. Patti Naumann, a facilitator with the Adoption Triad Connection of St. Louis. Her mother was adopted. Jason Reckamp is an adoptee who recently connected with his birth mother after many years of searching. Thank you so much for being with us. Great to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Patti, let me start with you. What are the major issues of the day in this adoption world?
Well, the major the issues today are that adoptive people have a natural right to know who they are. They have a natural desire to know their biology and their ancestry. But you have to match that with the so-called rights of the birth parents who they may want to remain anonymous somewhere along the line. So trying to match those two are the big things right now. Our experiences is that many people have had very good experiences with getting their original birth certificates and making connections.
But anonymity among the birth parents, is that common? Is that more common than not?
Today it's not, but in the past, while there was no statute or no legal law that promised anonymity to the birth parents, there was a verbal promise that was made by the agencies, and the legislature felt that they needed to honor that promise. And that's why we needed to compromise on the legislation that we passed a while back that allowed birth parents to fill out a contact preference form, selecting no contact if they chose to, but also selecting to preferring to be contacted as well.
Jason, let me turn to you with regard to your story and your quest to find your birth mother. It's a long story and a lot of players involved, if you will. But give us the Cliff Notes version, if you would.
Sure. It was always kind of a back burner in my mind, back of my mind, that I was going to, at some point in my life, when my ex-wife got pregnant with my son Michael, I was sick of filling out NA on family health history. So that would have been about 2004. Reached out, and at the time, every door I tried to open was closed. So as time went on, and I kind of watched from afar the processes and sort of people trying to change the law. Once I saw that happened, I was doing the proverbial backflip reaction. So I reached out, filled out the form, and 8 months later, it came back. My original birth certificate came back with my birth mother's name on it. So.
But that wasn't that didn't make it a whole lot easier, did it?
No. In a lot of ways, it was now with the internet, being full of rabbit holes, that took a little while. But at least I had something, an end in sight, if you will. So yeah, it took about 3 days probably of connecting some dots, and and it happened pretty quick. So thankfully.
If Missouri had not passed legislation, I think it was in 2016, Patti, isn't that right?
Yeah, correct. For 2016, adoptees born and adopted prior to 1940 were able to apply for their original birth certificate. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until January 1st of 2018 that post-1940 adoptees were able to request a copy of their birth certificate, mainly because the law, records were not closed prior to 1940. So the verbal promise couldn't have been made to those prior to 1940. That's why they were able to request them.
Where are we in Missouri now compared to other states with regard to this?
Well, Missouri's, there are about 21 states that are still closed. So the other 25 plus states have either full access or some sort of restricted access. We fall under the partial access with restrictions because they can, any adoptee can request a copy of their original birth certificates. However, if the birth parents fill out a contact preference form and choose not to be contacted, their name can be redacted from the original birth certificate. It won't prohibit the birth certificate from being released, but their name will be redacted, and that's called a partial or a some sort of restriction.
So you have the document, but you don't necessarily have the information you want it for.
Well, if only one birth parent fills out a contact preference form, they will put the other birth parent. They will release the information on the other birth parent if it's on there.
What is your story with regard to your mother and her story?
Yeah, so my mother died when I was 11 years old back in 1974. And 15 years later, my father came to me and said, my Aunt Elvira on my mother's side was doing some genealogy, and she happened to mention Rose's adoption. And my father went, huh? What? What are you talking about? And he started looking at some paperwork, and there were some clues that she was adopted, that yes, this could be possible. She died not knowing she was adopted. But she was born at St. Anne's Hospital here in St. Louis, which was known to be a hospital for unwed mothers. And so my father was unable to get any information from the Catholic agency because he wasn't a descendant of my mother. Technically, I shouldn't have gotten anything then either. But they were kind enough to at least confirm that she was adopted and gave me some non-identifying information. Very scarce. Just, she was 24 years old and did domestic work. And ever since then, I've been searching. Now, that was back in 1989, and it took me many years, and I had to change the law in 2011 to get the identifying information. So I've been at this quite a few years.
How did you change the law?
Well, in 2011, actually prior to 2011, I joined a support group in the Columbia, Missouri area, and they were active in legislation. And the first thing we did was we changed the records law, which is different than the vital statistics law and the original birth certificate. And what that did was that allowed lineal descendants to obtain identifying information if the adoptee was deceased. And that was one of the laws that we changed back in 2011. But that was associated with the adoption records piece. The law that we passed in 2016 was specifically associated with birth certificates.
How did the knowledge of your mother's situation change you or affect you?
I just felt like I got kicked in the stomach that day. I think there was still some hope that maybe it wasn't true. I just felt that, my mother was gone, and I grew up thinking I was Irish and French, and I was celebrating St. Patrick's Day. And, I just thought all of that, how could that not be true? And how could she not know? So when it was confirmed that she was adopted, that was just like another kick. It's just shocking. And once I was able to absorb that, it was a little bit easier to move forward and try to find the biological family.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say my family all reacted differently. My sister and I were very adamant about finding out more information, and the rest of the family was very indifferent and just didn't think it mattered.
Jason, let me turn to you with regard to your story and reuniting with your mother. Tell us how that came about and what it was like.
It was fascinating. Between finding the name, finding the actual person. Social media obviously played a key role in that. But finding her name and then talking to her on the phone, it was I was floored. Then being able to meet her in person, just a wonderful person. We met for lunch that ended up turning into dinner and drinks, and then my half brother showed up with his wife. It's been amazing. It's been unreal.
Were you apprehensive at all about making that contact?
In all honesty, yes, because I wasn't sure. In all fairness, I grew up in a great situation in a great family, but I wasn't sure, as well as I'm sure she was, of situations. Times change, people change, situations change. So I was hesitant, just only because a name and a voice don't really necessarily fix everything or make everything perfect. So you questions questions were answered as time went on, for sure. But yeah, there was definitely hesitancy there.
Your story, I should point out, is being told in the recent issue of the Riverfront Times, that folks can get all of the details, because it is a long story and a very interesting one. And speaking of interesting stories, folks out there in the listening audience, if you have any story related to adoption that you'd like to share with us, or questions concerning the whole process, we'd very much like to hear from you. Give us a call at 382-8255. That's 382-TALK. Send us an email to talk@stlpublicradio.org, or you can send us a tweet at STL on air. Patti, there's something always associated with adoption that probably shouldn't be there, and that is the word stigma. That comes into play in this whole discussion, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The main reason it was so difficult to get the legislation passed, as I said earlier, was because we wanted to continue to protect the birth parents' anonymity. But really, back in the day when women were forced to give up some of their children for adoption, it wasn't that we were protecting them from the adoptee, but rather we were protecting them from their families and their communities finding out their situation, which in many cases would have been an unwed pregnancy. So that stigma has carried on even today. It's surprising how today is different, but when you talk about birth mothers that from the 1960s and the 1970s, that's the people that they're considering. But my experience is, at least with the birth mothers that are coming to our group, is that this has just set up a whole avenue of healing for them. And that's been very, very important to them. The impact just isn't on the adoptee that obtains their original birth certificate, but in many cases to reach out to a birth parent that's probably been wondering about their child for many, many years. It really helps the healing process.
That's something we should point out. It isn't always the child looking for the parent. It also happens that the parent will look for the child.
Many times, you bet. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely.
Right. Jason, did you have a conversation about this with your mom once you found her?
Yes, absolutely. And growing up, I was talking to Patti about this a little bit earlier, that growing up, I always tried to look at, the other side of the fence, if you will. Situation being 16 years old, having a child, putting them up for adoption, and that wonder. Every November 11th on my birthday, where is he? Is he still alive? Is he okay? That and in a lot of ways that was kind of a driving force for me as well. Seeing, putting myself in other people's shoes to realize it wasn't just about me or my side of the fence. It needed to go to my birth mother and my birth father to know that, I'm okay, I'm alive, thank you, So, yeah, for sure.
It's a long time to have the question lingering, isn't it? Mm-hmm. We have a caller. Diane is going to join us from Creve Coeur. Diane, thank you for calling. What's your question or comment?
Well, mine's not a question. Mine is that my brother was adopted, and when we started searching for his birth mother, birth parents, we didn't have social media, but eventually he hooked up with an agency, and we found her. And he called her, and she was not remotely interested in having anything to do with him. And it was kind of rough and painful. She did meet him one time, and he looked a lot like her. But she wanted to keep him a secret. And his birth dad had already passed, but he waited some time and found out who the siblings were, and he contacted them, and they were thrilled to meet him, but his mom didn't want any relationship with him at all.
Diane, thanks for the call.
Yeah, it's common that birth parents. The reason she wanted to keep it a secret because she was told to keep it a secret. She was probably told when she gave birth that to go home and forget about this. So she probably didn't want her family to know. That's what she was being protected from years ago. So it is common, but in all fairness, the adoptee now knows their truth, and they also know that the mother doesn't want to have a relationship with him, and that's okay. I think that not knowing is sometimes worse than knowing. You can't move forward from what you just don't know. And these people are adults. That her brother is an adult, and I hope that he respected, at least her preference to stay away.
Jason, do you feel that this the reunification, if you will, and having these questions answered was in any sense liberating to you?
For sure. And, all those years of questions and just outright wonder. But mine ended, or I hope that it continues. But mine's in the feel-good realm. And Diane, I mean, while I understand it, and especially what Patti said, there is at least an answer, it's a bit of closure, to know. And I mean, it's great that siblings, they didn't have the same overly protective sort of view that I'm sure his birth mother had, and that's a shame. And I hope that closure fixes that, or at least answers those questions of unknowing. It certainly did for me, absolutely.
Well, it's quite a story, and there are so many stories like that. And what about the issue? Patti, you wanted to say something. Go ahead.
I was just going to say the whole purpose of my adoption triad connection support group is so that we can talk to people who are affected by adoption, just like her brother. What are the possibilities? What happens if you reach out and you feel rejected or they don't want to talk to you? These are things that other adoptees have experienced and other birth mothers have experienced. So the group it's a great group of people. We are experts at advocating for this. We are experts at our own feelings and what we've experienced, and we can share our experiences with others to help them understand and help them move forward on their journey.
They're not alone. There's many similar stories, and theirs is not unique. Right?
Correct.
Let's take another call. We'll bring in Wendy calling from Baldwin. Wendy, thanks for being with us. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm so glad to hear this being discussed on air, and I wanted to share that I am an adoptee whose birth mother found her, I guess in 2010. I would say I feel like it was a life-altering event. It has been such a gift to get to know her. One thing, though, is that we have just developed a wonderful relationship, but one thing that is interesting is that my birth mother struggles with, if we're in public, we bear such a close resemblance to one another that you cannot miss the fact that we're related. And yet so many people in her life and her family don't know that she had a child, who was given up for adoption. So that's something I know she's struggling with, but just wanted to put that out there.
Wendy, thanks for the call. Any response to Wendy?
Yeah, again, it's common. What's happened is birth mothers were told to forget about it. They went on with their life and never mentioned it. They got married and didn't tell their spouses. They had children and didn't tell their family. Their fear is that someone will call them and suddenly their secret will be out. And sometimes that turns out good. Sometimes it's healing for the birth parent either way. But sometimes she just doesn't want the family to know. But it doesn't happen all the time. I'm not seeing a lot of it. I'm seeing more stories that are happy than like that. But again, adoptees can deal with that disappointment if they run up against somebody who doesn't want to have contact with them. Jason,
how well do you get along with your new half siblings, if you will, and with the other members of your new family?
Fantastically. I start to see a lot of resemblance, both in speak, smile, just overall mannerisms. It's been, and it's nothing against. I have two brothers that I grew up with, in my adoptive family, and they're amazing. I love them, but we were always a little different. You could always kind of, see some glaring differences. But now with the new half siblings, I find a alarming amount of resemblances. I mean, it's pretty funny.
Yes, it makes a good story even better to hear it that way. Patti, what about the issue of guilt? I'm sure that there are many women who have given up a baby who live a life just tormented by that.
Yeah, so I think they're also afraid that if the adoptee finds them, how will they explain to them that they were able to relinquish them at birth? I think they feel like, how am I going to explain that to him? How is he going to feel when I gave him up? But like, it wasn't easy for them to do that, but I think they do feel guilty about that, and they're afraid that their biological child will think poorly of them because they think that they didn't care. But that's really the opposite.
Did you get into that at all, Jason, with your mom?
Yes, and it didn't take a whole lot of swaying for me. I mean, I understood. It wasn't that long. I mean, I'm 44 now, but it wasn't that long ago that I was 16 or 17. There was no. I never pointed the finger or even asked that question. Again, trying to put myself in their shoes. I can understand how there would be some feeling of underlying guilt or you mentioned earlier stigmatism. I get that, but with me, it's been great. That hasn't come up at all, and nor would I ever. I don't think my birth mother Karen had to even explain that. It's just kind of that unstated belief.
Well, our time is winding down. Is there a final thought, Patti, you want to leave us with regard to people who are wrestling with this issue right now? But it has to be quick.
Yeah, that's fine. They need to contact me through the Adoption Triad Connection on Facebook and private message me, and I'll point them in the right direction.
We'll put contact information on our website at stlpublicradio.org. Jason Reckamp, thank you so much for being with us. It's a pleasure to meet you. Congratulations on your new life, I guess it is relatively so.
Thank you.
And Patti Naumann, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com. The Gateway brings you the day's news from the St. Louis region and across Missouri. It also includes stories from the Illinois side of the river and our Metro East reporter, Will Bauer.
In Alton, in Belleville, in East St. Louis, in Edwardsville, in Cahokia Heights, at Scott Air Force Base, I'm Will Bauer, St. Louis Public Radio.
Listen to reports from Will and all of our journalists weekdays on the Gateway, on the STLPR app, and wherever you get podcasts.